Today, we are going to be reading The Candy Corn Contest, Chapter 2, by Patricia Riley Giff, a two-time Newbery Honor-winning author. Last chapter, we learned how Ms. Rooney, Richard Best's teacher, was having a candy corn contest, and how nervous Richard was because of his struggle with reading. Let's continue on to find out what happens in Chapter 2. Chapter 2. It was almost time to go home. Richard was sick of waiting for show and tell. "All right," Miss Rooney said at last. "Who has something to tell us?" Richard waved his hand around in the air. Miss Rooney picked Emily Arrow. Emily hurried to the front of the room. She was wearing red sneakers. Her legs looked like Slim Jim pretzels. "I went to my Aunt Helen's wedding on Saturday," Emily said. "I'll tell you all about it." Richard wiggled around in his seat. Emily told about the bride's dress and the bridesmaids' dresses. She told about the wedding cake. Richard sighed in a low voice. Oh, in a loud voice. Emily danced around in her sneakers. "This is the way the bride danced," she said. "There she is." Richard looked at the other kids. Timothy was reading a book as fast as he could. He'd have about 5 guesses by tomorrow. He might win the jar of candy before Richard guessed 1. Suddenly, Emily saw Timothy reading. She frowned. "I guess that's all," she said. She raced back to her seat and opened her library book. Ms. Rooney looked around. Richard put his hand in the air. He knelt up on his seat so Ms. Rooney would look at him. "Sit down, Richard," Ms. Rooney said. She looked around the room. Wayne O'Brien went to the front of the room. He stood there for a minute. Then he shook his head. "I don't remember what I was going to say." In front of him, Richard could hear Matthew trying to read. He didn't know the words. At last, Wayne raised his shoulders up to his neck. He went back to his seat. Ms. Rooney smiled at Richard. "Do you have something?" Richard rushed to the front of the room. He took a deep breath. "I'm going to have a sleepover," he said. "Everyone's invited." Emily looked up from her book. "Great," she said. Richard swallowed. "I mean the boys, only the boys. It's a sleepover party for boys." "Oh," said Emily Arrow. "There isn't room for girls," Richard said. "All right," Emily said. "I'm coming," yelled Matthew. "When is it?" "The night after Thanksgiving," Richard said. Timothy Barbiero put his hand in the air. "Will there be good stuff to eat?" "Sure," Richard said. "My mother's making spaghetti and Italian bread and leftover turkey. We're going to have ice cream for dessert." Derek Grace raised his hand. "I can't come," he said. He looked as if he were going to cry. "I'm going to my Uncle John's." "I can't come either," John Bizik said. Richard looked around. Not so good. Now there would only be 6, counting himself. "Don't worry," Matthew called again. "I'm coming. I love ice cream." Richard went back to his seat. "You're coming, aren't you?" he called to Timothy Barbiero. "I think so," Timothy said. Dawn Bosco was up in the front of the room. "My grandmother lives in Florida," she said. She held up a fat grapefruit. "My grandmother sent us a whole box of these." Richard shuddered. He hated grapefruit. He opened his book to page 3. Last week he had read 2 pages. Maybe he could get 2 guesses. As soon as Dawn sat down, he raised his hand. "Can I use last week's book for a guess?" Miss Rooney thought for a minute. "Oh, good," Timothy Barbiero said. "I read about 100 pages last week." Miss Rooney shook her head. "I think we'd better stick to this week. We'll start with today." Richard looked at page 3. He tried to read the first sentence. It was a tough one. He wouldn't have to read many words, if he ever got there. Timothy Barbiero raised his hand. I started my new book this morning, he said, and now I'm almost finished. That's wonderful, Miss Rooney said. Richard looked at Timothy. Timothy was smart, and he was lucky. Richard wished he was like Timothy. He was sick of being dumb and unlucky. All right, so that's a wrap for chapter 2. Maybe some of you have questions from your teacher, whether you are reading in school or you're at home virtual or you're just reading for fun. So whatever you need to do now, go do that, but you can always come back and re-listen if need be. I will see you next time for chapter 3.